know me well know that outside of live sports, of which I watch a lot, I love sports, but outside of live sports, I don't do a ton of TV watching. First of all, I just don't have time for it. Second of all, because there's not a whole lot to constantly draw my interest in. And even more rarely do I use TV as a reference point for a homily, not only because that would require something having enough substance to be worth bringing up, but second of all, I'm always hesitant because, of course, any secular work I don't endorse from the pulpit, as all of them are in some way or another a mixed bag of sorts. But nonetheless, there is a particular TV show that is a favorite of mine that was on my mind and heart preparing to preach this Sunday. And that is the show that wrapped up just this past year that was called Blue Bloods. Now, there's a lot of crime, drama, cop shows out there, and most of them don't hold my attention. But Blue Bloods, in addition to doing those parts well, is more than a crime cop kind of show, but to me is ultimately the story of a Catholic family. Even though the show writers themselves aren't Catholic or trying to portray Catholic messages, it's a very Catholic story. It's a family in New York City. The kind of patriarch of the family is police commissioner. His father was police commissioner before him. All the sons are cops. The eldest daughter works in the DA's office. And so it's a very connected family, but a family that experiences a lot of drama with law and order in the city of New York. And so the episodes are full of high drama, long nights, lots of hours, and the characters themselves, while Catholic, are certainly no saints. They don't always do the right thing. They sin and they struggle at times. They even struggle with their Catholic faith, grappling with the teachings of the church. And the show itself doesn't always portray the church right either. For example, I can never get why priests are always shown as just hanging out in an empty church in the middle of the week, dusting the candle stands, just available to walk in and talk to. I wish I had so little to do that I could just hang out in here and piddle around in the church. But all of that aside, the show, for all the individual storylines, has one common point in every episode, and that is the Sunday family dinner. And around that, in their family, the Sunday dinner is an obligation. It's not optional attendance no matter what's going on, what case you're working, whatever you're doing. The family always gathers. They go to Mass on Sunday, and they gather for the family Sunday dinner. And it's a multi-generational event. And around the dinner table, they lay down whatever burdens they're carrying for a little while, and they join in thanksgiving, and they talk, they unpack, and they rebuild family bonds. The family dinner scene is often the final scene of the episode. And of course, it narratively gives a device to conversationally unpack the themes of the episode, which might seem narratively lazy, but I contend that even if not intended by the writers, is highly symbolic theologically. Because in this, we find a model, albeit fictional, of Sabbath rest. From the very beginning of Scripture with creation, God establishes the Sabbath rest by his own example. The seventh day on which he rests is not a day of divine inactivity after 6 days of creation, but it's a day in which God basks in the fullness. He then provides the Sabbath for man to pause from his labors and to enter into this fullness with intentionality with God. Remember the Sabbath day. Keep it holy. 6 days you may labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. This is the third commandment given on Sinai in the book of Exodus, and it goes on to be repeated in the Torah some, 7 times. And this theme carries throughout the Scriptures. even into the New Testament and the era of the church, when with the apostles, the Sabbath focal point shifts from Saturday to Sunday, the day of Easter resurrection, the Lord's Day, as they come to know the so-called eighth day, the day that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, this theme of Sabbath rest may seem to be the opposite of the theme of today's readings, which is that of vigilant readiness. But in fact, the two go hand in hand. We are called to live a life of watchful expectation, living as pilgrims on a journey to the promised land, not as a people tied down to a foreign land. The Sabbath rest is the key day of encounter with the Lord to contextualize the journey and to remind us that our treasure is not here in earthly things. Last week, in the first reading from Ecclesiastes, Koheleth found all things to be vanity. And if left to just worldly consideration, everything is ultimately vanity. It's pointless. All our labors, our achievements, our possessions, our activities have no meaning. But the Sabbath reminds us that our meaning, and therefore our treasure, is not just worldly. Jesus exhorts his disciples today to provide money bags for yourselves that do not wear out, an inexhaustible treasure in heaven that no thief can reach nor moth destroy, for where your treasure is, there also will your heart be. The Catechism explains this tie between vigilance and Sabbath rest in the following way. The Sabbath is for the Lord, holy and set apart for the praise of God, his work of creation, and his saving actions on behalf of Israel. God's action is the model for human action. If God rested and was refreshed on the seventh day, man too ought to rest and should let others, especially the poor, be refreshed. The Sabbath brings everyday work to a halt and provides a respite. It is a day of protest against the servitude of work and the worship of money. It seems to me that one of the biggest crises facing Christians in today's world is a fading understanding of Sabbath observance. In fact, this is part of the reason for the Jubilee year that we're currently celebrating. A Jubilee year is meant to be a super Sabbath, a Sabbath of Sabbaths. That's why Jubilee years are on the 50 after 7 times 7 of the cycles of weeks and years. The Jubilee is a Sabbath of Sabbaths to refocus us on our heavenly calling through prayer and pilgrimage. So how do we best observe Sabbath? The law, the precept of the church in Canon 1247 says, on Sundays and other holy days of obligation, the faithful are obliged to participate in the Mass. Moreover, they are to abstain from those works and affairs which hinder the worship to be rendered to God, the joy proper to the Lord's day, or the suitable relaxation of mind and body. And so here we find the legal precept. The first part of it speaks of participation in the Mass, what we call the Sunday obligation. And it's a serious obligation. People are often surprised when they bring a litany of sins to the confessional that regardless of what sins of anger or lust or unforgiveness, whatever they may bring, that if they confess a serial missing of Sunday Mass, that's the sin I'll focus in on when giving counsel. It's not because it's necessarily the worst sin, but it is a sin that comes not from just weakness of the flesh or will, but suggests an inherent lack of priority given to God, a drifting away from the wellspring of life and grace. Said differently, if you fail to observe the Sunday obligation, you will likely lack the strength to keep the other commandments. sacraments. Sunday Eucharist is central to everything. It's central to our life as Catholics. Everything culminates in our Sunday worship, and everything flows back out from it. Preparing for the great Jubilee year of 2000, Pope St. John Paul II offered the Church a letter called Dies Domini, the Day of the Lord. And he said, "Receiving the bread of life, the disciples of Christ ready themselves to undertake with the strength of the risen Lord and his Spirit the tasks which await them in their ordinary life. For the faithful who have understood the meaning of what they have done, the Eucharistic celebration does not stop at the church door. Once the assembly disperses, Christ's disciples return to their everyday surroundings with the commitment to make their whole life a gift, a spiritual sacrifice pleasing to God." The Eucharist is central to everything. There is no Sunday on the couch. There is no vacation from Sunday. Sunday is the day of the Lord. It is the day of resurrection and the day of our life. But Sunday also cannot just stop with Mass. There are 24 hours in Sunday, not just the hour or hour 15 or 20 if I'm the celebrant. There's more than just an hour, hour and a half to Sunday. John Paul II says sharing in the Eucharist is the heart of Sunday. But the duty to keep Sunday holy cannot be reduced to this. In fact, the Lord's Day is lived well if it is marked from beginning to end by grateful and active remembrance of God's saving work. This brings us to the so-called Sunday rest. At base level, this means refraining as much as possible from normal work or tasks. But it's more than just that. Sunday is a day of rest, relaxation, but also contemplation, prayer, family time, a chance for the works of mercy, a day where we can set down the servile burdens of the other 6 days of the week to remember who we fully are and what we are created for. And so I wish to offer just a little bit of food for thought on how we can make a better Sunday observance. First of all, we have to retrain ourselves to remember that Sunday is not just part of the weekend. And John Paul II makes a reference to this, that in the Western world, the day of the Lord always stood alone, but it's a rather modern thing to speak of weekend. And the weekend is important. It's an opportunity where most are able to get away from work, whether it's Saturday, Sunday, or other days off from work, whenever it may be, to engage in other activities, to get things done. But Sunday is not just part of a secular weekend. It's the Lord's Day. We need to plan our Sunday around Mass, not plan our weekend and figure out how to fit Mass into it. Now, since the Second Vatican Council, there's been opportunity for a wider variety of Mass times. Decades ago, there was no Saturday evening anticipated Mass. There was no Sunday evening Mass. The Eucharistic fast required and the celebration of the liturgy inherently made Mass be Sunday morning. But out of recognition that in a secularized world, there are some people who can't escape from having to work on a Sunday. Or there may be times where travel or legitimate obligations prevent someone from being in the pew on a Sunday morning. And so Masses are offered from Saturday evening to Sunday evening to maximize the opportunity to make sure everyone can attend Mass on Sunday. But we need to make sure we're picking the right Mass time for the right reason. If I need to go on Saturday evening, do I need to go on Saturday evening? Or am I going on Saturday evening to free up my Sunday? Do I go first thing Sunday morning to free up the rest of my day, or last thing in the evening because, I partied too hard on Saturday night and didn't wake up till 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon? Is it for the reason of offering the Lord and framing the day in the best way, or is it just something I'm cramming into the itinerary for the day? Beyond this, how do we dress for Mass? Now, this is a touchy topic, and it's a favorite topic of some homilists, and it invariably goes off the rails. I'm trying to offer you a moderate presentation of this topic, which is to say there are two extremes and lines of thought on this. One, which is how you dress doesn't matter, just being there is what's important. And the other extreme, unless you're in coat and tie, you're a slob and shouldn't be there. Neither of those is correct. Yes, ultimately, the most important thing is to be here. And second of all, we need to remember that Sunday best looks differently for different people. We're a people of multiple different cultures, different socioeconomic backgrounds. And so what Sunday best looks like for one does not look the same for another. And we should never look around and judge people on appearance for how they are at Mass. But internally, we do have a choice that we need to make, and we should reflect on it. Do I offer the Lord my best? Or do I dress better for work, or to go to the theater, or to a nice dinner, and dress down for church? If I do so, what am I suggesting to God? And more importantly, what am I subliminally saying to myself, to my family? How do we show the Lord that we offer him the best of ourselves on his day? Weekends are busy. Family life is crazy. But nonetheless, how can we refrain from just normal sports and activities, housework, or the temptation to use Sunday to catch up for Monday? Some of those things have to happen. But we can make choices to let the day be different. Sunday is the day that is not dictated to us by the world, but that we freely offer back to God. How can I make choices to spend the day in gratitude with God, with my family, and in giving back to others? One should not be entering Monday exhausted from Sunday. Now, sometimes in body, that may be the case. It just happens. But at least in spirit, we should be renewed. Sunday is meant to be the wellspring of life, the recharge, to help us to conquer the other 6 days of the week. And so, in conclusion, John Paul II says, Sunday is a day which is at the very heart of Christian life. From the very beginning of my pontificate, I have not ceased to repeat, do not be afraid. Open wide the doors to Christ. In the same way, today I would strongly urge everyone to rediscover Sunday. Do not be afraid to give your time to Christ. Yes, let us open our time to Christ, that he may cast light upon it and give it direction. He is the one who knows the secret of time and the secret of eternity, and he gives us his day as an ever-new gift of his love. The rediscovery of this day is a grace which we must implore, not only so that we may live the demands of faith to the full, but also so that we may respond concretely to our deepest human yearnings. Time given to Christ is never time lost, but is rather time gained, so that our relationships and indeed our whole life may become more profoundly human. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus constantly battles with the Pharisees over Sabbath observance. They are rigid on their external observance. In fact, they judge Jesus as not upholding Sabbath requirements. They follow through ritually, but bind their hands into inactivity on the Sabbath in order to check an artificial box, but leaving no room for mercy or gratitude to God as they do so. Jesus, on the other hand, observes Sabbath, but shows how to make it even more human as he heals the sick and lifts the burdens of others. The Sabbath was made for man, he says, not man for the Sabbath. Sabbath observance should not be a burden. It should free us from worldly burden and expectation and free us to be more human and more godly. And so, whether it's in our own families, around Sunday dinner, or whether it's around the Sunday dinner table from the family in Blue Bloods, may Sunday be a time where all our labors can be set down, conflicts tabled, if only for a little while, a time of rest, a time of family, of relationship, and gratitude. And so, happy Sunday. Happy day of the Lord. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad.